This time last year, it seemed almost inevitable that we would have a ratings downgrade in June. And if we didn't get it in June, we'd definitely get one in December. This year, it seems unlikely that we'll get a ratings downgrade in June, considering how much better the outlook for the South African economy is now compared to where it was this time last year. Yet markets are still operating on the possibility that we could get a ratings downgrade. We've recently seen an improvement in inflation, down from 6.6% down to 6.3%. Also, the current account deficit narrowing in the last quarter of last year to 1.7%. So suddenly things are looking better. Sure, we've still got the bottomless pit of Eskom, we've still got the bottomless pit of SAA, and we've got big issues when it comes to political leadership and any kind of business and consumer confidence. The country's growth performance between 2000 and 2015 has been disappointing, even up until 2017. Last year we saw the worst growth numbers since 2010, down 0.3. We were up 0.3% last year, far away from the 3 to 5% that we're capable of. So let's look at what we're going to do with the ratings issues come June this year. Gardner, Rusike, he is with S&P Global. It's one of the ratings agencies that will decide our fate come June this year. Are you cutting, or are you leaving us unchanged on negative outlook? We can cut this interview down to 30 seconds. You choose.
I wish I could say that with certainty, but I can't because these are company decisions, committee discussions. We take the information that we get, understand, analyze it, and then make decisions from there.
Because the reality is you've got nothing to do with that decision as an individual. There is a committee that's its global committee. People have a telephone conference call a couple of days before the big ratings decision, and they go through a process of analyzing the data, which people like yourself collect on their behalf.
That is correct, absolutely. So being the analyst on South Africa, I'm part of that process.
You're part of the process, but you have no say in the outcome. And it works like that around the world, doesn't it? Nobody in the country in which they live is part of the ratings decision on that country.
No, not necessarily. It's I think where you live doesn't matter. So this is the sovereign rating. So for sovereign ratings, we have, I think, a number of analysts that come together in a committee and analyze the information, the discussion. So as the primary analyst, I'm part of the discussion, and I do have an expression in terms of my views on where things are going, and it's also up to the discussions and the committee members in terms of the final decision that ends up being made. Okay,
so what is your view on where we're going?
My view is the company view, and we have a negative outlook.
A negative outlook, which means that the next move in rating either has to go up to neutral, in other words, you believe things are improving, or actually you're worried about our ability to pay our debts 5-10 years from now, and therefore you must downgrade us to sub-investment grade. Those are the two choices that are open. Or you
we can still maintain, yes, we could still leave it unchanged. I think we probably have, we have time, so what we endeavor is to resolve outlooks within a 2-year period for investment grade ratings.
When did you put South Africa on a negative watch?
We first put it in December 2015.
Okay, so 2015, which takes us, you've been on negative watch then for a full 12 months, plus the first quarter of this year, which implies by December 2017, you're going to want to make a decision either to improve the rating to neutral or downgrade to sub-investment grade.
Yeah, but I think we need to cross the June report first before we get to the December. So one of the things that we always say is, in order to keep an outlook on negative for a longer period, you have to be looking for something. Right, as long as we can convince ourselves that there's still something that we're looking for that could improve the metrics, then that could help to stabilize the ratings. Then we can keep it for longer.
Okay.
Yeah.
However, we sit in a position in South Africa where, tell me if I'm wrong on this, the outlook for South Africa is considerably more positive today than it was on this day 12 months ago. Would you agree?
Probably yes. Probably yes on a number of different factors, right? You could talk about, you mentioned the current account deficit being much narrower. The exchange rate has appreciated, which is also good compared to 12 months ago.
Inflation is more under control?
Yes, inflation is still somewhere closer to 6%. But I think the biggest issue that we have with improving credit metrics is the issue of economic growth. right? And if you look at from the first time that we put South Africa on negative outlook, growth has actually weakened to where we are today.
Now,
So,
the last
yeah.
growth measure we have is the 2016 growth number,
Correct.
which was 0.3%. The outlook
Yeah.
for this year is quite a conservative 1.3%. It could
Correct.
get closer to 2% for this year, which on the balance of growth pictures around the
Yeah.
globe isn't bad. But is it good enough for South Africa to stable for downgrade?
Right. So here's the context. When we look at the growth, right, we put it in a context of per capita growth, which is take into account population growth. So in the last 2 years, South Africa has been growing in per capita terms negatively because it's been less than population growth.
So population growth is outstripping economic growth. So over
Correct.
time, the jaws widen and you have
Exactly.
a problem.
And that's exactly what we've been seeing. So for South Africa to be firmly in that range, you need growth that is way higher than the population growth. So we're talking at least 2.5 to 3% growth, right? At least in the longer term. So what we need to see is to see that signs indeed that growth is going to pick up. We're no longer revising growth numbers downwards. We are now getting above 2%. Then you can start being comfortable.
All right, comfortable.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, but comfortable is a luxurious position in the world in 2017. There's a lot of discomfort around the world. However, we are seeing global economic growth pick up. We're seeing Brent crude prices, for the time being, coming down to around $50 a barrel.
Yeah.
South Africa is a big consumer of imported crude, with
Yeah.
a stronger currency, with good rainfall, lower food prices into the second half of this year, the potential for lower interest rates in the second half of this year. I find it hard to see how you will justify a downgrade to sub-investment grade. On what basis might you justify it?
It's possible. We've spoken about growth. That growth, indeed, it bottomed, but it's still weak. It's still below the levels that we can be
But if
comfortable
it's
with.
recovering
That's one.
and it shows signs of continued recovery,
Correct. So the question then would be on the pace of recovery.
Okay.
That's on the growth. Then I think the other issue that we were mentioning as well is the political dynamics, that in a way of weak growth environment, if political tensions do increase, that can impact on government policy framework, that can impact on policy implementation, and all of the economic reforms or working together between business, labor and government, that can be undone in that difficult environment. Then the other fiscal story is partly that if economic growth is weaker, it has an impact on tax revenues and can impact on the Treasury's targets. Then the issue of the contingent liabilities, if you compare between last 12 months, contingent liabilities have increased because of perhaps partly on the drawdowns of Eskom, which are quite large and which can hit on the government's balance sheet.
so it remains a distinct possibility that we could see a downgrade in June. It remains a possibility, if we don't get a downgrade in June, that December is another target. We have to ride an economic train on this one, but also we fully expect, I think, as South Africans, that the second half of this year is going to be the biggest political, and I nearly used a terrible word, but a fight with four letters in front of it. It's going to be a very, very messy battle as we head to the ANC leadership contest in December.
No, that's correct. So I think on the politics, it's just important to make sure that it does not impact on the functioning of institutions, that you avoid, I guess, or what you would call on goals that can have a negative impact to the economy. So some of those metrics that we look at can be affected negatively. So it's important to keep it in check, and succession issues do happen in a number of countries, and South Africa included. As long as we remain clear about the policy framework and where the ANC government will go to on its policies, then that's okay.
I mean, we're used to living on the edge of chaos in South Africa. We're used to uncertainty. I think there's a fair amount of it. And I mean, Trevor Manuel makes the point when you ask him questions about ratings agencies, saying people like yourself have been around since the year dot. You've been analysing this country. You know it almost better than the political office bearers who are in their jobs for shorter periods of time than you've been analysing the financials of the country. And so you understand the environment. You also understand its risks better than most. When you look at something like the SASSA mess that brought us to the brink of calamity, I mean, really, within 2 weeks of disaster, I mean, that surely is a big red mark when it comes to policy certainty, the ability to deliver, to maintain social, political stability.
Yeah, no, I mean the point with the SASSA issue is more about the social implications that it can have, especially if the recipients do not receive their funds. And this also says a lot. in terms of the policy framework, in terms of administrative issues of that particular department.
And the quality of governance, the ability of South Africa to forestall problems long before they become crises.
Yes, that's true. But I think if we put it in a context, I think in the bigger picture, besides this specific issue, we do have a very good view of South African institutions and the policy framework, which supports some of the writings.
The Constitutional Court has probably, not single-handedly, but been one of the key elements of giving ratings agencies such as yourselves the level of confidence that you've had to not cut to sub-investment grade yet.
That is correct. So that is when we look at institutions, we do look at the way institutions work and the checks and balances that are also provided by other agencies. So that's where probably you see the judiciary stepping in. We have had previous examples, I think, where the executive has not exercised the checks and balances and only to be told by the judiciary. So it is very good that you still have the judiciary playing their role. If you lose that, then it can become very difficult, I think, in terms of providing checks and balances to other branches of government.
Let me paint a scenario for you. You decide not to cut the rating in June and you give us another pass until December. We get to the first week of December, and I think it's during that week in which you're expected to make the next ratings pronouncement as to whether or not you extend the 2-year negative watch, whether you downgrade to sub-investment grade or you upgrade to neutral. But a political contest for leadership happens only 2 weeks after that. How on earth would you make a decision under those sort of circumstances?
Well, I think the ANC is going through policy discussions at the moment, and there are a number of policy documents, so we have a sense of where policy will go, irrespective of who becomes leader. And also, even if you have a very positive scenario about whoever takes over, what's going to happen is it will be leadership within the party. You're not going to get overnight changes in terms of the government policy framework. It will be another process before we get to the 2019 election. So yes, there can be leadership change, but it should not be necessarily the only factor that can lead us to delay a rating decision, unless there are strong points that we do see things could change very quickly. But by our experiences, things do not change overnight. No. They take time.
Would you concur, though, that we are in a more stable position today than we were 12 months ago?
I think that's very difficult. I mean, there are some improvements, but not stable. So we have a negative outlook. So we're still seeing risks on the rating and some of the metrics that we look at.
Are those risks diminishing, or are they steady, or are they rising?
Depends with the particular areas. I mentioned the issue of contingent liabilities that they've actually increased.
The point is, don't rest on your laurels, South Africa. Get your ducks in a row. Just to summarize.
The negative outlook, yes, suggests that there's a chance that the rating could change. So we still need to see a lot more in terms of the economy, what government is doing, what they've promised to do, and we see a delivery which can help on the metrics, then it can take us somewhere.
As they say on election nights in many constituencies, too close to call. Gardner Rusike, thank you very much indeed. Gardner Rusike is the Associate Director at S&P Global. Ratings decision in June, we'll get a pass, I suspect. Come December, it's all to play for. Till next time, good night.